Thank you. As I was just introduced, my name is Mike Brocchi. I work on the Angular team, specifically focused on the Angular CLI. I've been doing that for about 2 years, so if you have questions about that or anything related to it, feel free to stop me, talk to me at any time here at the conference or online later on. So, what are we going to talk about today? Beyond the CLI means let's talk about more than just what the CLI actually is. So today, we're going to talk about the current state of the CLI. What can the CLI currently do? What's available to us? What can we do? What can we generate? What can we run? But we'll get into that. After that, I want to talk about what's coming real soon. I'm going to go over a couple new features that are about to drop, so that it's things you can take advantage of and understand now, so that you can take advantage of that in your applications. Also, beyond that, what's in the future? So the future of the future of the future. To be able to see, all right, what's the roadmap kind of look like? What kind of features are down the road that may not have an immediate timeline, but something that you can take advantage of later on down the road and expect, or hopefully expect. So currently in the CLI, there's a lot of different things you can do. Some you know about, some you may not know about. Clicker's not working, but that's okay. We don't need it. And you knew, if you use the CLI, more than likely you've created an application. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown of what the different things are here. Serving an application, to be able to run it in debug mode, to be able to see, hey, my application's running. How can I change things? How can I do things interactively in my local environment? Building your application. It works great on your machine. That's super, but you know what? Applications don't do much good unless there's users involved, in which case you're going to have to build it to be able to deploy it. Testing your application. It's much better to find the mistakes by yourself up front or within your team, so be able to test your application. Not just test your unit tests, but also your end-to-end tests, to be able to have your integration tests to make sure that the entire experience of your application is cohesive. Ejecting. There's a build process in the CLI. It may or may not work for you right now, in which case if you would like to customize your build process, you can eject and basically get your configuration out to be able to tweak it to your own needs if you have needs that the CLI may not be meeting for you. A note about eject. There's lots of different options right now that you can pass into your build, ngBuild command. So whether or not you want it to be production, whether or not you want AOT to run, whether or not you want to minify, those types of flags are available to you. Eject actually takes every single one of those options and builds a custom configuration based off of those arguments. So if you want to have a Webpack configuration that is for your dev environment, you can eject with those settings. If you want to have a production one, you can eject again with another set of settings to be able to have different environments after you eject. Schematics and generate. So you can generate different things within your application. And that's now being done through a tool called Schematics, which you heard Brad mention earlier today. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that today. But you can scaffold different things within your application, so whether or not you need a new component, a service, a directive, pipe, class, interface, a bunch of them. Doc. This is one of those ones that not too many people know about, is you can run ngDoc and then a search term. And rather than having to go from your machine and say, oh, how does change detection work? I want to learn about change detection. And what you can do is type ngDoc and type change detection, and what you can do is, or what it will do is open your browser, querying the angular.io website to search the documentation for you, so you can go straight from your experience of using your terminal into your browser to do your research that way. So a little convenience feature there. Get and set. There's a lot of different configuration options within the Angular CLI.json. So whether or not you want to generate tests, whether or not you want your components to be inline, your templates to be inline, or your styles to be inline, you can set that all in your configuration file. Of note is that you can also specify things at the global level. So if you wanted to always use Sass whenever you generate, you can specify that with a -- global flag to be able to set those values for you then. This way, ngNew automatically grabs Sass for you. You can also configure which package manager you are using. So if you want to use NPM, great. Set it up to use NPM, which is the default. Or you can specify that you want to use Yarn. Or if you're in China, CNPM is what you need to use, so you can configure that as well. XI18N, to be able to do internationalization. So you can extract out the files that you need for internationalization to support multiple languages. Also, version. You can determine what the version is of your CLI, your Angular dependencies within your application. So that's the set of what the CLI currently does. But I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into schematics. By show of hands, who's heard of schematics? Perfect. Who had heard of schematics before Brad mentioned it this morning? Decent number. OK, good. Just curious. So schematics is basically gives you the opportunity. So the CLI generates files for you. And what happens if you don't really like those files? And maybe the format of it's different than what you like, or maybe your company has a different strategy or a different style for the app or your code that you definitely don't want to follow the default. That's where schematics comes in. So you can come in and update and change your generate commands to use your custom schematics to generate files so that you are happy with the results that are coming out. And that's another use case. Brian mentioned a few this morning. That's another particular use case which we'll dive a little deeper into. So schematics will allow you to get the default value. You can extend, which, like I said, we'll show in a little bit, to be able to extend a schematic to take something and add additional functionality to that. Basic, complicated, whatever you need to do. Or you can say, hey, what you're generating is total crap. We don't like it at all. Completely replace it with whatever you want, whatever you have within your environment. There's that. Hans recently released a blog post, as Brad mentioned. So to get a lot more information, more so than I'm going to get into right now, go and read the blog post. There's a lot of great information there, but I'm going to walk through one of the examples from there as well. So we're going to do a quick demo. We got to let the GIF finish, though. So hopefully it goes a little bit better than that. All right. And not that schematic demo. Perfect. So what we have here is a project that we set up, or that I set up, to basically, it's a project for schematics. Of which I've started a little bit, and I'm just going to walk through what I've already done. So in the package.json here, when it scaffolds out, we'll tell you that there's a schematics, which is pointing to a collection. And what that's doing is saying, hey, this library here supports schematics, and the collection that it exports is in this file. So let's take a look at that particular file. That file is defining a property called schematics, which is a map of the different schematics that are supported within this collection. In which case here I've already typed in the settings to be able to use to generate a class. So this Angular CLI can generate a class for you. It just generates a single file that will be a model for within your application. So what we're going to do here is we're going to extend that. So I have to find a description, because it's my super class now. It's going to use a factory, which is a class or a file that's going to import in or require to be able to generate that schematic, to run that schematic. And also a schema where you can specify different options for how that schematic is actually going to run. So inside there, we're going to look at the factory. Well, we can look at the schema first. So I'm defining a few different properties in here. A name, because you need to say what class it's going to generate. The path of where it's going to live, and also the source dir. So basically, the source dir is for your application, but the path is for your application. So inside here, I just set up the general shell of what a schematic will generate for you. So in here, if we do, I just created a few snippets in here. So I'm going to use something called chain. And chain is the ability to run multiple rules, because everything that happens in a schematic is a rule, that it will process a rule and keep on processing. So it takes an input of a tree and outputs a tree. And a tree is basically a virtual file system to be able to interact in. So it'll take in your tree of your local environment, and you can modify that and tweak that through this process. So I'm going to chain it because I'm going to have multiple steps within here. The first step I'm going to do is say, hey, I want to be able to bring in my external schematic. So the first thing I want to do is, hey, go ahead and process this external one that Angular provides, which is from the package here, at schematics/Angular, which I've added as a dependency into this project because I wanted to extend that. And I want to generate the class schematic within that collection, and I want to pass in these particular options. Inside there, we're going to run Update. So let's take a look at this real quick. There's a bunch of code here, but I'm going to glaze over it real quick. So it takes in a tree and a context, which gives you access to a logger and a few other contextual information about how that rule is going to run. From within that tree, I'm going to get a directory. So in that directory, go ahead and get me or in that tree, get me the directory for these options, or for this path. And then I want to visit each file within that directory, because I want to be able to do different things in there based off of the logic that I've added here. The first thing, then I get a callback function, which is the path of every file that's found within that directory. Making sure that it ends in TS. If it doesn't, I don't really care about it right now. Excuse me. I'm going to get the content out of that file. So I'm going to tell the tree, hey, go ahead and give me the content of that file so that I can see what's within that file. Making sure that there is content and it's not null, so that maybe the file may be a null file or nothing within there. And then I want to add this header into that file. So in my company, we always have the rule that ngAtlanta has to be at the top of every TypeScript file. Thanks, Zach. So what we're doing here is we're just checking to make sure that, you know what, that content isn't there. If that content's not there, then I want to add it in. So I'm going to overwrite that file at that path with my header plus all of the other content. And then all I'm simply going to do is return that tree out. So I'm going to read the tree in, make my changes, and spit it back out, and let those rules process. So I'm going to save this. And what I have here is I'm doing a build process locally, npm run build, and then I'm calling schematics, which is the CLI for schematics. My collection is in the current directory, and I want to run the class schematic. So collection : schematic is the syntax there. The options that I want to specify, so I'm going to specify a foo class, and I want to force it in case there's anything there that'll automatically overwrite it. And by default, and you'll read this in the blog post once you get there, anytime you reference your dot as your collection, it basically says, hey, don't generate anything because it's going to mess up your source code. So I'm basically saying, yeah, that's okay, I'm going to take care of that, I'm all right with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this here, and it's going to tell me that it created a file, source app foo.ts. So we're going to take a look at that, source app foo.ts. And it's taken then the default class that's coming in here from the default Angular schematic with export class foo, and then prepend on ngAtlanta onto there. If you have questions about that, let me know later on. And then we could also, if we wanted, come down conceptually and add a footer and add something down here, and we'll say more ngAtlanta on a new line, because comments go on a new line. And we'll do that, and then all we have to do is say, all right, we're going to add on a footer, save that file, and we're going to rerun that, and we should see the footer come out as well. Awesome. And this is just a rudimentary example, thank you, of what you can do with schematics, and just scratches the surface that you can go ahead and tweak your files and add on, but there's a lot more that you'll be able to do with that. All right, we're going to go back into slides. We good? All right, cool. So I want to talk about the near future. What's coming in the near future? And by near future, I mean the things that I'm about to talk about. Budgets and update are currently in beta. So they're in the 1.7 beta right now, which is in version 3 of the beta, which was released, what is today, Thursday? Yesterday. So you can go out and check that out. I think I'm running 1.7 beta 2 right now locally. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that demo. So a demo is a method to find out all things that can possibly go wrong. That's a quote by me. So we're going to go jump back into some code. And the first thing we're going to look at is budgets. Budgets is a way of keeping your application under control. How to make sure that your application isn't getting too big. So we're giving you some tooling to be able to support that and enforce that within your application. So what you can do is for each app, you can come in and define a budgets property, which is allowing you to specify multiple budgets. In there, you can specify multiple types of budgets. It's JSON, so you have to have quotes. Of which you can specify that whether or not you want to calculate your budget based off of all files within your application, all script files, any one file, any one script file, a specific bundle, or the initial load. For this example, I'm going to show it with bundle. And when you specify bundle, you need to say, hey, what bundle am I actually talking about? Nobody reminded me that I needed a comma in JSON. In which case, I'm going to look at main. I want to look at the main bundle, which you'll notice down here below is actually right now 161 kilobytes. So I want to specify that the maximum error is going to be triggered if I were to exceed, say, 150 kilobytes. So with that case, what is going to happen, since I'm specifying this as an error, that process will automatically fail when I do a production build. Budgets are not evaluated on non-production builds because who really cares how big your application is when you're just debugging it? But when you deploy it, you want to make sure that your application is performant and small enough in size. So you can see here that you get an error and that process exited, which is great because when you figure this into CI and the continuous integration environment, that process will exit with a failure code, which will not allow your CI process to continue, and you'll be able to catch these things before deployment. More specifically, you could also do this as a warning, which will give you just a warning. It'll allow you to proceed because the process will not exit. You'll just get the message, and that's something you can just have to keep an eye on your application sizes. So that is coming soon with version 1.7. And the last thing that I want to talk about in the near future is a new command that's coming to the CLI. I think Brad mentioned this one as well, ngApdate. So what ngApdate will do is take your application and update it to the latest versions of Angular, TypeScript, and the CLI. So all your Angular dependencies, including the CLI, as well as TypeScript. So you see here, I have an older application set up that is using currently version 4.2 of Angular. I'm really hoping this works with Wi-Fi because it needs to go out and find out what the latest versions are. So I'm just going to run update, but before I do, make this awesome. A little Easter egg that nobody's really found. And you can run in and just get different messages. So what we're actually doing is we're making this awesome. Anybody familiar with that HTTP status code 418? Yes, I am a teapot. Okay. But anyway, this does make it awesome. So I'm going to run the ngApdate command, which is a schematic that will go in and evaluate my package.json. And you'll notice here, and I'm going to load up a diff, and click on the file, there we go. Type that, and you can see that it went through and it found all the different Angular dependencies and said, hey, you know what, those are old versions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update all of those to the latest version, which is currently 5.2.3, which was released earlier this week. So it's up to date. It's updating zone.js. The CLI got updated to 1.6.7, as well as TypeScript also got updated to 2.6. So fewer reasons to work with an older version of Angular, run ngApdate, and update your application. Back to slides. Thank you. So now on to the future. Update. I know. We just talked about it, and that's coming soon. But right now, it just goes through and updates your package.json for you and updates those versions. Well, why stop there? We're using TypeScript with this CLI. We can evaluate your code to say, hey, this pattern doesn't really match with something that's going wrong. So we can evaluate your application by looking through the abstract syntax tree to be able to say, hey, look, this isn't following a pattern, or a breaking change is released, and we can say, hey, this pattern is now broken, update it to the new pattern. The example I really like to use for this to drive it home, when Angular 2 went to Angular 4, templates went from using the template tag to using the ng template tag. And with that, we'd be able to go in, look at your templates automatically and say, hey, yeah, that's a breaking change, but you're running an update, and when you see you're going from 2 to 4, and we can go in, evaluate your code, and make those changes for you. So there's a lot more things to come in updates, so that's why that's here. The build improvements. Brad mentioned that Bazel's being investigated and being used internally in some cases to be able to build your applications in a different way. But we're doing more than that. We're also looking at how to add library support with this new build system. It's going to be like an abstraction to be able to provide different implementations. So Webpack will still be there as an implementation of a build process, as well as Bazel, and as well as more hooks for customizations as well. This is a target. Also add. There's currently a CLI issue, number 9387. If you are passionate about that, go ahead and take a look at it. It's really cool as far as I'm concerned. So the idea is that you can specify ngAdd as a new command and specify a library that you're interested in adding to your application. So ngAdd at Angular/material could go in and add the material dependency. It can automatically import in some of the common pieces that you're using from material, so button or a side menu or what have you, or possibly different options within there. It's still just in a discussion phase, but the ability to configure third-party libraries automatically using schematics. Deploy, this one was actually brought up to me earlier today as a discussion. To be able to deploy your application, to be able to provide a common way to deploy your application from your local environment to a remote deployment, whether it be Firebase, Heroku, Azure, many implementations could be there, implementing a common interface to have that within there. So to recap, we talked about the current status of what's currently in the CLI. You may have learned something new within there that you weren't aware of. Some new features that are going to be coming in a new release with 1.7 with budgets and ng update, as well as a roadmap of some of the things that are going to be coming down the road. So thank you for coming out, for learning what is coming beyond the current CLI. Thank you.